Hi everyone. I hope everybody's having a great day wherever you are in the world. Welcome to this webinar, Organizational Development Through and Beyond a Crisis. My name is Loïc Lemarois, and I'm a marketing manager here at Headspring. So we want this webinar to be interactive. The main point is we want to hear from you. So please do send in your comments, your questions. So there's a question box here on the right-hand side of the screen. So please send them in. We will answer them during the webinar, and as well we'll have 10-15 minutes of Q&A at the end of the session. So please do send them in. We'll make sure to take care and to read them carefully. So today I'm joined by Angela Lane, who is a senior executive in talent management, as well a researcher and an author. And as well, I'm here with Sergey Gorbatov. He's a professor of HR and Organizational Development at IE Business School. Angela, Sergey, hi, how are you today?
Hello, how are you?
Good. I'm really glad you could join us. I'll let you guys pick up, and the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having us. And to everyone that's listening, welcome and many, many thanks for joining today's conversation. We hope it can be a conversation. Without doubt, COVID-19 has wreaked havoc. The loss of life, the impact on health is devastating. That devastation would have been worse if it hadn't been for an unprecedented public health initiative that it became known as kind of flattening the curve, this idea that globally governments would mandate that we all stay home. Now, for many, that's meant unemployment, and that is also another devastating consequence of COVID. But for many others, the social distancing measures that have been put in place simply changed where we work. Out of necessity, Sergey and I like to joke that many of us have participated in the world's largest pilot study on working from home. And many of us have learned through that pilot study that we can work virtually and we can do it really successfully. In the process of doing that, we've also learned lots and lots of new skills. There are the obvious skills that we've learned. Certainly, we are more tech savvy. I'm more tech savvy today than I've ever been. Adam Grant, you can see a quote from him here. He's professor at Wharton Business School, but he tweeted this quote, and it came from his son's kindergarten report, saying that his son could independently mute and unmute himself when requested to do so. So we're all learning new and sometimes unexpected skills. But as Sergey and I thought about it, and perhaps got a little bit more serious, we think that collectively we've built other more complex and definitely much more difficult to learn skills. So think about some of the things you've learned perhaps yourself over the last month. I think we've all learned to deal a little bit with ambiguity. We have had to learn on the fly, that is for sure. I think many of us have needed to use a lot of creativity and solve a lot of problems and get good at working with different scenarios, planning in scenarios. I know I've learned a lot about patience, and we've all built, I think, a little bit more resilience, and many of you will be familiar with the research around resilience and ultimate success. I think the question for us, though, as researchers, as practitioners, is, will this last? And there are two aspects to that question. One is, will the physical fact of working from home last? What's our future? What's the future of work going to look like? And will the skills that became necessary, will the need for those skills last and perhaps even be magnified in the future? So we like to think of it like this. As credit cards were to banknotes, as Uber has been to taxis, will this crisis and what it's done for where and how we work be that disruptor that ultimately changes traditional corporate life? So let's start with that question. We think that's a great question. As you think about the future, what are the competencies that you believe would be the most critical for success in the post kind of COVID world? So what would you think about? we'd like to have a bit of a conversation around that. So we're going to do a bit of a poll. We know that certain competencies are important to success. We've got a list of those here. You can take a minute to carefully read those. These come from our book, Fair Talk, 3 Steps to Powerful Feedback, but you could find similar lists in other places. There's a lot of research around the competencies for success. So take a minute to look at those, and then using the poll, which of those competencies do you think will be required most for your organization as you move through and ultimately beyond the crisis? So as you reflect and vote, hopefully the technology works for us and we get some results and we can share those.
And just the process, how to vote, you need to go to slido.com, that's slido.com, and input the event code that you see at the top. And of course, as you reflect on these competencies, and I think that you are showing poll 3, we need poll 1, please. Very often when we do this exercise, the audience says, well, of course, all of them are important. All of them are, and our employees need to be great.
That is not an option.
Category of skills, you know, they need to be strategic and achieving. They need to drive for results. And leading skills are very important. Energizing skills, yeah, of course, it's about vision and purpose and motivation. And we want people to be lifelong learners, and we want them to influence. But pick one. So this is a bit of a forced experiment, right? So pick one that is most important for your organization to emerge, thrive, and survive in the post-COVID environment. Okay, so we'll give you a couple of seconds to think and vote. These are 8 categories of skills. These are not necessarily skills. We just want to see in broad brushstrokes where's your head. And it's interesting to see how the results are coming in. We see that 7 people have voted, 8. So shall we try and go for, I don't know, Angela, what number do you like? Do you want 20 responses?
I think that would be great. 20 would be great.
Okay,
so if you've been sitting there,
let's give 15 seconds for people to vote, and 12 seconds of those are left. 9 seconds left.
Oh, you're putting us under pressure, Sergey.
5, 4, 3, 2,
no.
1, and we can close the. So we can close the poll. Let's see. Interesting. So Angela, they're developing skills, and those are the skills that require listening to others, providing them with experiences, coaching, self-learning, and feedback. Emerged as the most important. How do you read those results? And I failed to see what was the next one. Did you catch that?
I thought it was self-awareness or perhaps self-development. So one of the self, but it moved a little quickly. But let's talk about the developing one. Actually, this is super interesting, and I'm kind of proud of you guys for this one. One of the things that we know, and actually Sergey and I have done some independent research, very separate to this, but on this topic, which is that in a world where people are not just physically remote, but where we're remote from the work because it's thinking work, developing others is actually one of the few ways we can actually manage performance and productivity, because we can't actually see them do the work, literally or figuratively, but by developing them, that's how we can help them best achieve great results. So I think people are onto something. If I can develop others, they can manage their environment, they can manage their performance, even if it is remote from me. I like it. I like the thinking. Sergey, what's your thoughts?
I think you're spot on, Angela. people have realized, right? And we did that other study well, actually the study, the results of which we are going to share today. And one of the questions there was around a very similar one. What are the top competencies? And people came up with, well, it's the managerial competency, managing people, giving feedback, managing processes, setting up KPIs, because all of a sudden people realize that they can't control everything. It's easier to control people and outcomes when they're in the office, even though today we're living in the knowledge economy. So my question is, okay, how exactly are you controlling the thinking process of your people? But now that people are working even more remotely, people are working virtual, you don't have a choice but to set up the governance, set up the processes, and enable people, teach them, develop them to work independently. So this is very much in line with our thinking, research, and what we're hearing from other colleagues. And we are inviting you to ask these questions at your workplace. So I guess that the slides will be shared after this webinar. So please steal with pride. You can definitely use our competencies and have this conversation in your organization and see what you will hear both from your leaders, from your employees, and from your HR functions, and compare the results.
Absolutely. And we can, when we make the slides available, we can include a copy of the research that we did on the importance of developing others when you are in a knowledge-based economy. So really an easy read, but fascinating read. So select behaviors, things like developing others, will be key after the crisis. But what about the fact of working from home? What about that? So we already see that some companies are embracing what we've become to call the new normal. We hear that expression a lot. Two prominent examples, you can see them here. Twitter has offered the opportunity for people to work from home permanently. Facebook are rolling out remote work permanently for new hires in some of their most critical capabilities. And they're offering the opportunity to existing employees, and I loved this, that have strong performance. So not surprising perhaps that you see responses like that from the tech industry. But what we found fascinating is it was not just the tech industry. Very traditional industries, banking, one of the most traditional industries you can imagine, are looking at how we're working today and understanding that it has some benefits. Barclays Bank, you'll have heard of Barclays, through COVID, 70,000 staff members working from home. Their CEO has been quoted as saying that the idea of the big city office might just be a thing of the past. MasterCard, another example, have said that the majority of workers can actually work from home and return when they're ready. But here's the bit that was fascinating. Concurrently, they're saying we're going to look to consolidate our global offices. So they're looking at this as an opportunity to think about real estate and their footprint. So some companies see it as an opportunity. Some companies are seeing it as an aberration. But fascinating, of course, because it's not just companies, organizations that get to have a point of view. Employees will also have a point of view. So no surprise there. So as Sergey and I discussed, work beyond the crisis, we believe organizations and their employees are therefore set up to either be in great alignment about what their future looks like, or potentially suffer from significant misalignment. And here we've painted 4 what you might think of as broad scenarios. So let me start with the bottom left. So in this world, despite the fact that there have been prolonged patterns of new behaviors working from home, the practices of the past, maybe their practices, perhaps their habits, are preferred. And what emerges after the crisis is our traditional work environment. And guess what? Everybody is satisfied with that. We've called that scenario the old normal. Everyone in there is aligned, so it's looking pretty good. But what happens if we move up a quadrant? Here, You can imagine a situation, think of your organization, you could imagine a situation, the business is hit hard, the economy is challenged. There's the possibility that businesses see work from home as an economic opportunity, just like we saw with the banking example. In this case, though, the employee actually wants to return to work and may even resent the fact that employers are looking to shift the cost burden onto them. We've called this scenario the economic rationalist. Think about whether or not that might fit your organization. Let's move to the bottom right-hand corner. And this one, we could almost have predicted, if Sergey and I were hypothesizing, we might have predicted that this would be the most popular. Because in this scenario, we have employees wanting more and meeting a reluctant employer. So there is tension in this one. Why might this have been perhaps the predictable scenario? Well, two reasons.
Spoiler alert.
Before COVID-19, the data was showing, so well before we even knew what would come, the data was showing that employees were starting to show preferences to want to be more virtual. You can imagine then that in a scenario where we've been forced to work from home, it's reinforced. I can do this, I can be productive. And you know what? Perhaps I get better balance. Maybe I've reduced my commute. Perhaps I've needed to spend less money on petrol and clothing and all sorts of things. So we can easily hypothesize that employees would be positive. But employers not being positive, you know what, we could hypothesize that as well. Not quite so in the same quantifiable way as we can employee response, that's been well researched, but we can think about some really high profile examples. So think about Yahoo, for example. IBM was another one. Both examples where companies faced with economic challenges had as part of their response wanting to bring people back in. So not unusual that companies might respond that way, and that is therefore the basis for tension. Finally, fourth scenario, right at the top right-hand corner. This is another alignment or aligned scenario. Here you see leaders seeing the opportunity to get all that good productivity with fewer overheads and with a more engaged workforce, and employees seeing that they can deliver great results in ways that bring flexibility and freedom. So in the top corner, everyone wins. So it's another scenario, we call it win-win-winner. So we then tried to find out which of these scenarios would we think most likely, and would our hypothesis hold true. So Sergey, how good were we at predicting the results?
To get the answers to these questions, we ran a survey, and this is a quick setup slide just to give you a sense of confidence and the magnitude of this research. So we surveyed nearly 500 working executives in the period between April 14th and May 7th, so right in the midst of the coronavirus crisis. And as you can see, the sample is balanced by gender, it's geographically diverse, and also it's a high-level population with nearly 65% being in senior management, so people who make decisions or at least are aware about the preferences in the upper echelons. And although 70% were HR respondents, there were only a few questions where we found the statistically significant differences between HR and the business leaders. And we really went through and we made sure that there was no skew because of the functional belonging. Nearly half of the respondents worked for companies larger than 5,000 employees, but there is also strong representation of big, medium, and small organizations. And industry-wise, the most represented industries were pharma, business services, retail and FMCG, banking, insurance, and high tech. But overall, the responses came from virtually every industry. We have 42 industries represented overall. And the size and the diversity of the sample really give confidence in the results and their generalizability. So let's start discussing the results with what the employees want. the employee perspective. Even before COVID-19, in our book Fair Talk, we were writing about this new worker deal. We were referring to the changes in both the nature of work and the new worker preferences. There we said that in the modern world of work, you can't see the work, it's mostly knowledge work, and you can't see the worker because the trend was already towards virtual, remote, distributed work, and there was a lot of data to support it. There was a Gallup study done in 2016 that reported that 35% of the employees, or 1/3 of working environment, would change jobs for the opportunity to work remotely full-time. So if often we couldn't see the worker pre-crisis, COVID-19 accelerated the trend and removed from the office every single one of them. And it brought into focus the benefits of the working from home arrangements, whether it's in the increased flexibility to arrange your day, additional time with family, being able to have breakfast and lunch with your partner, with your kids, losing the commute, not having to be in traffic for hours, or because you were exposed to pet therapy if you have a pet. I do have a pet, and I know that that really made a difference for me to be with my dog all the time and not leaving her alone for the whole day. And our survey confirms that the pandemic has raised awareness of the benefits of working from home. Surely you've heard the horror stories with people living in very small apartments, not being able to take calls, having bad connections, feeling a sense of isolation. But also we heard positive stories. Judith, an executive at a Fortune 100 company, told us, and I'm going to read this because it's a direct quote: "I enjoy waking up at 6:15 and doing my exercise before waking up the kids. I've lost 8 kilos. I feel great. I'm not keen on going back to the office full time." Based on our findings, almost 70% of the respondents, so 70%, 2/3 of out of those nearly 500, believe that their employees will want to work from home moderately or more. And the COVID effect that we observe in our data is also consistent with other emerging studies. So now if you go and you read what's emerging out there, both in terms of thought experiments, but also in terms of research that comes from the answers of real people, we see that there are estimates, for example, one study quoted 25 to 30% of workforce will be working from home multiple days a week by the end of next year, by the end of 2021. A survey done by Deloitte, and they ran a study in the financial services industry. Also, they asked about 500 people in the UK, and they found out that only 10% of them had the negative experience of working from home, so those horror stories, while 70%, overwhelmingly, people were very positive. They had positive experience. And having experienced virtual work and for an extended period, our respondents believe that the employee sentiment will skew in favor of working from home. So the employees will want more. Now let's move to the employer side of the equation. We figure out, okay, this is what employees want. How will the business react? Despite perceived employee sentiment in favor of remote post-COVID world, the picture for business is less clear. Collectively, we do see a positive skew, with about 68% of respondents reporting that senior leadership in the organization will support virtual working. Unlike employees, where sentiment prior to the pandemic was positive, organizations report that virtual working was only marginally important prior to COVID-19, or not important at all. So the mean was 2.56 on a 5-point scale. However, now we can see a very large increase. So an increase by 1 point in social studies is a very large increase, and we can see that the business sentiment is also changing. Understanding why it's changing is more difficult, but we will offer you 3 insights. Insight 1. First, we examine the organizational learning that we operationalized as collective realization that COVID-19 honed the employees' resilience and preparedness for change in the future, that it provided awareness of the value of working from home, It facilitated greater work-life balance and so on. So organizational learning, what has the organization learned from this experience? And we found a strong positive relationship between organizational learning and further investments in virtual work arrangements. So those companies and firms that realize that, hey, it makes sense for employees to work from home, they are more likely to invest even more in doing so. As Angela said, this forced work from home experiment has brought into relief the impact of traditional ways of working on the cost structure. And savvy leaders have a new appreciation of the lack of necessity for intensive business travel, decreased office expenditure, and often increased productivity. And it also might factor into these decisions and into these new business sentiments. Now, this relationship between organizational learning and investment in virtual work is even stronger when the perceived time to recover is greater. And it makes sense. Those who believe that this is going to last and they're in this for a long run, they want to be better prepared. And of course, they would want to put in place measures to enable their employees to work virtually. Second insight, leaders know that employees have an appetite for more virtual work. In a talent-starved world, remember, nobody has cancelled the war for talent. Leaders are concerned that competitors might deliver what they fail to. And our data confirm this. So we ran a regression analysis and we tried to understand which levers or factors would be most important in putting the virtual arrangements in place. So being concerned about the competitive practices around virtual work is the third most important driver of investing in work from home arrangements for all employees. So businesses are looking over their collective shoulders, watching to see if virtual work offers start coming in for their non-mobile talent. Only the business services industry seemed to be less concerned. They were the outlier. There was a significant difference in their respondents. They weren't so much concerned about that, probably because they already were working virtually. That's the nature of their business model. A finding that we didn't expect, and it appears to be somewhat perverse. The perception of the employee current preference for virtual work had a negative and significant relationship with organizational intentions to put virtual work in place. But this could be explained by the fact that current situation is forced on us, while in the future it might be a choice. And then employee sentiment will, of course, be positive, as we've already discussed. And finally, the third insight that we would like to share with you, as with many things in life, size matters, and it also matters for virtual work. The data vary based on company size, with leaders of larger organizations seeming more reluctant to embrace virtual work. So you can see that companies that are larger than 1,000 employees, there is a perception that their leaders are more reluctant. They don't want their employees to work virtually. And while there was a significant differences between the smaller companies and the bigger ones, the large and extra large companies, there is a difference, but it's not significant. So why is that? It may be that bigger companies are better placed to resist employee pressure and still compete for talent. They have this employee value proposition that will guard them around employee sentiments. They still will be very attractive for talent. For smaller companies, maybe it isn't an option. And perhaps for those companies, virtual work can level the playing field. I want to share one example. I was talking to an employee of a small tech UK company with about 50 employees. They never had a physical office. So a company of 50 employees, no physical office, no expense in real estate, but each had an access to a co-working space where they could hold team meetings if they wanted to, or meet a client. It was a successful startup, high-performing startup before the crisis. And when COVID happened, it didn't meaningfully impact their ability to collaborate and produce. Okay, so it's time for the drum roll. We're about to share the results on the four scenarios, right? So what's the likelihood of each of the four scenarios to occur? According to our expectations, we had two competing hypotheses. One of our competing hypotheses won, and so we still got to be right. The win-win scenario was, well, the winner, with 76% of respondents reporting that they expected both their employees and senior leadership to be more supportive of virtual work going forward. The other three scenarios scored significantly lower, none of them exceeding 10%. Well, it doesn't mean that they are not going to happen. So this needs to be taken with a grain of salt. It's the perceptions of what's going to happen of a variety of people, but still perceptions define reality. So we at least need to be aware of them, and we need to listen to what very important people in organizations believe around the possibilities. So three things to note. Those of you mathematically inclined have already tried to sum them up. They don't sum up to 100 because of rounding, so don't worry, there is no mistake. It's a response percentage by survey participants. It doesn't represent a percent of employees that will have this experience. And also we remove the neutral responses of 3 so that we have a cleaner picture of the results. Regardless of where your company and its employees fall in terms of preference for virtual work, there are strategies that better support success in each of these scenarios. So we will share with you specific recommendations for each of the scenarios after we do 2 short but terribly exciting polls and answer questions. So we have a question from the audience, and it's related to these results. I think it makes sense to take it right now. So Angela, we have a question. What research, if any, has been done on the impact of remote working on innovation over time?
You know what, on innovation, I don't know that I'm sure of any. Certainly on some of the basics like productivity and performance, actually to the extent that there's research, it either shows that people are just as productive and perform just as well, or that they in fact are more productive. So on that front, but innovative over time, that's I think has a slightly different implication. Yeah. And it goes, I think, to our belief that it is collaboration and people being together that leads to, you know, the building on of ideas and things like that. And I don't know of any long-term study into that.
I was swayed by this last part of the question. Over time, do we know that virtual work increases innovation? Yes, there is some research that actually innovation increases when people go virtual, start working virtual, but we don't know anything. So, and it's a great research question. So what happens over time? In Harvard Business Review, a couple of months ago, just before COVID, or actually it could be last year, there was an article called "The Collaboration Overload." And actually, if we think about it, when people collaborate and when they brainstorm together, you fall prey to a whole host of biases, like the herd thinking, or you start thinking like people around you. People with louder voices get the greater share of the communication. People who are more introverted don't get to contribute. Now, working virtually and being on your own, contributing unique ideas and contributing a variety of ideas, and it's great if you have technology that allows for whiteboarding, for crowdsourcing solutions, for collaborating. We know that virtual work and innovation have a positive relation. Absolutely, the same with productivity. What are those relationships over time? I think that's a topic for a separate webinar.
Excellent. And just one build, you talked about the idea that sometimes the benefit of virtual is it starts to level the playing field. We're going to come back to that in terms of thinking about what are success scenarios for companies. And one of them rests on this idea that you need to level the playing field.
All right. So the poll again, you must have the slido.com open, and maybe you also have the code there as well. I think that's how the platform works. But if you don't, go to slido.com and enter the event hashtag that you see on the screen. It's hashtag capital H web, capital OD25. I know that it's not very it's not very user friendly. So sorry that you have to type it up. And the question is, consider your scenario. So already in your mind, you must have placed yourself in on one of the 4 boxes. Is your organization ready to fully support your preferred return to the workplace scenario and the consequences of it, right? And this consequences of it piece is very important, because it's easy to say, yeah, we'll do all virtual, win-win winner. Well, each of those has a plus and minus attached to it as we look into the future. So is your organization ready? Yes or no? And as you vote, we're going to change.
Oh, this is
okay.
Great. This is good news.
Interesting. So we have 14 people who voted. Let's see. Let's get a critical mass. They said that to get some level of significance, of statistical significance, you need to have at least 30 data points. So let's see if we can get there, because then we can talk about meaningful results. I'm not saying that less than 30 is not meaningful. It's still very important. But then, if we want to ensure the quality of research, 30 and above is what we want to strive for. But oh, interesting. So you see now the results look quite different than what they looked with the 14 employees. With 14, it was about 1/3 versus 2/3. As the number increased, they actually become quite balanced.
Yeah. And so if you
55 versus 45. Okay, well, it looks like there is some work to be done. Because if we're thinking, and we don't know when the new normal will come, we don't know what will happen. The reemergence might occur as soon as September, or it might occur as soon as September next year. We don't know. But being ready and being prepared is very important today.
I think, and one of the things that we'll talk about is, are we thinking about what ready means in a big sense? Are we contemplating a lot of the implications? So we'll talk about some of those when we get to some of the success scenarios we would recommend as practitioners.
Yeah. Okay, so now let's go a bit deeper. The first question was, is your organization ready or not? Yeah, and there we got a split answer. Now let's think about the systems, and we will focus on the people systems. Everything from attraction and recruitment, getting people into the company, all the way to organizational effectiveness and design. This is how the organization works. And you have a mixed bag of everything. Goal setting, performance management, feedback in the organization, development, talent evaluation management, rewards, retention, promotion, relocation, you name it. So the question is, which of these processes do you need to change most? So which of these processes requires most change to secure the success of your preferred scenario of returning to work? So if you think about, okay, where is my organization going to with these considerations of going back to the office, sending everyone virtual, a combination of the two, which of these processes do I need to change most? Yeah, and again, most is the keyword. Okay, Luke, if you could show us the results, please.
I'm excited for these results.
Okay, 5 people have voted. 7. 9. It's fascinating how the results change as people vote, and I know that each of these questions deserves at least an hour or two. So if you're running a workshop in your company and you get your senior leaders around the table and you have a deep, profound conversation, easily we can run a workshop, a day workshop on that, and we're asking you to vote in less than a minute. So we are fully cognizant that we're putting you in a very difficult situation, and we're asking you to think on the spot.
And so, as you said, people can take these and do that in their organization. And I think, you know, having leaders talk about what needs to change, you know, which of these things are we going to have to do differently? Which of these things are we going to have to be great at? And we're going to hit on some of these when we talk about scenarios. When we
share the recommendations. Yeah.
Because some of these things we think, depending on your scenario, are going to become very, very important.
So org effectiveness followed by goal setting and performance management, and there is a conversation happening right now about, do we need to have a different stance on performance? The goals have changed. Do we do performance evaluations the same way? Do we change the criteria? What does good performance mean in this new world? Right, and then the third one I saw was development, and that's pretty much consistent with the results to our first poll.
But I'll get you to keep scrolling down, because there's one I'm very interested in. Look at rewards. Take a look at that one, and look at retention. So we're going to come back to those concepts. That is for sure.
Rewards and retention, 0%. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've written that down. Got to talk about that.
Thanks so much. Now let's go back to our presentation and discuss where to from here. So Angela, what recommendations can you give people for each of the scenarios?
Exactly. And for those of you that know Sergey and I and some of the stuff we do, we are in our hearts practitioners. So if we come away with nothing that is practical, that usually doesn't work for us. So we asked ourselves, based on the research, where to from here, and really what would you do as an organization, as a leader, perhaps you're a HR professional, what would you do based on your potential scenarios? So let's take a look at that. And we are not making a value judgment here about which scenario is right or wrong. Because one is more popular doesn't make it right. What makes it right is it's the right one for your business or your organization. So absolutely no judgment here, but different strategies will be required. So was your strategy the old normal, this idea that everyone could go back? It could seem, if that was your organization, that it would be all good because there's lots of alignment. We'd say yes, but we'd offer a bit of guidance. First of all, you have leveraged, or you have invested rather, to get through the crisis. We would encourage you to leverage that. Maybe you've provided infrastructure, cameras, software licenses, you name it. Leverage what you've paid for, because it is linked to higher productivity. So why would you lose that? Secondly, things have changed, not only the use of technology, but also potentially these new positive behaviors that we referenced right at the start. So you're not going to want to lose that when everyone comes back to the office. So get very purposeful around what you've gained. Have people been better problem solvers? Have they been better decision makers? And make sure that you've got systems in place to continue those behaviors. That could be a whole other webinar on how to do that as well. But finally, we would get you guys and suggest, patience will be required. People have lived for months with a different level of what we're going to call freedom, probably psychological freedom, but there has been a camaraderie and a casualness that's come from being hashtag all in this together. I mean, even that, the fact of the hashtag tells you something about the collective consciousness. Don't be surprised if people come back to work and some of those more casual behaviors have come right back with them. So lots of patience. But maybe your scenario was employees wanting more, but the leader not yet being convinced. So in that scenario, we might predict some tension. If that's your organization, you're going to need proper change management. You're going to need to shift employee sentiment, and that means communicating, over communicating the importance of being physically together and how it connects to the corporate strategy. It's going to have to help people get that connection. Secondly, and this goes to some of the answers we just saw, not every company competes on virtual work or work-life balance. You need to get crystal clear on your organization's employee value proposition and how it outweighs the benefits of virtual work. So that means, do you know what you provide? Is it a great place for development? Is it a great place for a career? Do you pay exceptional rewards? Because whatever that is, you need to make sure that you're clear on it and that you're selling yourself on it. And I've got a whole list of companies, and I was going to share their EVPs and how they're approaching this, but I might just post those or send them or something like that in the interest of time. Finally, keep your eyes wide open. What does that mean? It means two things for us. One is keep them open internally. Are you measuring engagement? Are you tracking retention? Are you looking after your high performers? Monitoring competition and see what they're doing to make sure that the lack of flexibility on work-life balance isn't impacting your workforce. But also keep your eyes open for what's happening outside. Are other companies cutting overheads faster than you're able to? How we saw this is, there are many examples of companies that forgot to look outside for broader economic trends. Look what happened to bricks and mortar retail, right? This is not that much different. So don't be the BlackBerry to everyone else's iPhones. If you're not going to be an early adopter, that's great, it's fine, but be prepared to be, if necessary, the fast follower. So economic rationalist, if your organization's the economic rationalist, but employees are not there yet, we've got a couple of scenarios for you. The first is to remove barriers. If people are resisting to change, don't make working from home harder, make working from home and being productive easier. So remove blockages to productivity. Then you're going to need to nudge. What do we mean by that? A nudge is an environmental factor that makes it easy for people to make good choices without being forced to. So do things like make work from home the default option. People typically just go with what is the default. But finally, and this goes to something Sergey said right at the get-go, one of the reasons why people may resist is if your organizational culture is characterized by lots of interpersonal interaction, lots of networking. If people feel being remote disadvantages them, right, they were not going to go there. So you have to level the playing field, I think was the expression that we heard. One way of doing that is to have role models. People like your most senior leaders demonstrate that they are successful and remote. So make sure that you think about how to level the cultural playing field. So the most common scenario by a long way, as you saw, was this idea of win-win-winner. Where everybody is all in. Does that mean you don't have to do anything? No, it doesn't. 3 strategies for you as well. The first is you've got to get practical, because now you may be dealing with a scale of change that's significant. So are you ready for the practicalities of that? In the first instance, you may actually need to invest up front. Technology, ergonomics is something we haven't thought of perhaps because it's been short term. But if this is how we work, how do I think about those things? Again, if this is happening at scale, the risk is your organization starts to lose alignment. That means that things like, and we saw some of them in the previous chart, super clear goals, regular feedback, making an expectation that leaders keep their teams connected, having clear expectations for performance, super important, because that's how you'll keep people aligned even when they're distant. And finally, flexibility is a potential source of competitive advantage for you in the labour market, so make it work for you. We'd suggest it becomes part of your formal employee value proposition, not just we offer work from home, but what's it saying about your company? It says that you value results, not FaceTime. It says that you work on a culture of trust. It says you're modern and embrace change. That's a selling employee proposition. So think about those three strategies. What if I don't know, Sergey, which of these boxes I fall in? I'm still unclear. The situation is fluid. Does that mean I can do nothing?
You can be strategic even if you don't know what to do, right? And there are situations when you don't know what the ultimate objective is or what's going to happen. Then being strategic is actually about actions that will set you up for success irrespective of the scenario. And we offer you 3 no-regret investments that you can confidently put in place today and expect future dividend. So first, address the fact that all of us are more devoid of meaning than before the pandemic started. At home or at work, we have lived through a collective shock, and we've learned from the previous experiences from the 2008 recession, and we know that that crisis will lead to negative outcomes. The mental health will drop, the job and employment security will rise, and people will feel those negative outcomes. But science is conclusive also on the fact that when people make better sense of what's going on and when leaders signal safety to them, then those harmful contextual factors can be mitigated. And I just want to share one example, and that's the president of Harvard University, who in April sent a message, sent a letter to staff and saying that for the next 90 days, the staff and professors of the Harvard University will be paid and there will be no cuts. And that's a very smart move. What the president did, he signaled safety and said, you have so many things to worry about, your lives, your families, how to arrange your work. Focus on that. Don't worry about your paycheck. I don't know what's going to happen after the 90 days, but for the next 3 months, that should not be your concern. Second, leverage the aftertaste of the shock to reinforce agility, learning, and togetherness. Research reminds us that even the negative career shocks may have positive consequences. So use every opportunity to reinforce your employees' new skills by having them reflect on what they have learned, their development objectives or personal trajectories. Having learned how to connect better, encourage them to foster new connections, even in the virtual environment. For instance, at Buffer, and that's a social media firm, it's a social media platform company, employees opt in to virtually meet colleagues at random, just as if I would run into someone at the coffee corner in a physical office. So there are lots of opportunities. Make sure that you leverage them. And finally, get the policy framework right. Whether the new normal will apply to a few or most, it will only benefit the organization having clear expectations on performance, on availability, on agility, or to change arrangements if the business requirements necessitate. So heed the advice of Elspeth Johnson, who is a senior lecturer at MIT, who said, if external ambiguity is the new normal, internal ambiguity is the new enemy. So take this opportunity to provide clarity in your policies and practices. As a parting thought, we do want everyone not to lose sight of the silver lining. With its devastation in terms of personal, social, and economic cost, this is indeed an ill wind. Let's hope it blows some good. For those organizations that embrace the possibility of finding the win-win, it may be game-changing. But even for those for whom the right decision is to return to proven approaches to business, there are some no-regret next steps. Taking these can help all businesses, even those whose approach to virtual work is very conservative. They will all move us forward. And we will have learned from the world's largest pilot study on virtual work. With that, I would like to close, and we have 5 minutes for any questions.
Thank you very much, Sergey. Thank you very much, Angela. This was very, very interesting. I found it actually personally very interesting. There's a lot of things that I was not aware of, and thank you very much for sharing that. So I agree, we do have 5 minutes for questions. So please do send them in. I will try to answer them. If we don't answer them now in the session, we'll make sure to communicate them the answer via email later. So actually, there's a comment here that came during the webinar. I think it's more like asking your thoughts around it. So I'll read you the comments. So the person said that he thinks that working from home is overrated. It's unsustainable on the long run in career development and in people development. And this will be an issue because people are not meeting each other. So how will this look like actually in the future if we continue to work from home?
Well, I think there's a lot of things there. And I think it is true that for some people, depending on their own wiring, the need to work with others, to be physically proximate, varies. For others, their ability to substitute that for things like technology varies. And so I think that there are going to be different responses in different populations. I think the question is, for those people for whom physical proximity is important to how they learn, how they develop, how they perform, for those people, has the technology or will the technology get good enough that it, supplemented by in-person meetings, forums, events as required, will it be enough? And I don't know that we know that. I think the indications are that for those people that experience, the majority of them say they think they can make it work.
And I want to add that we can't go against our biology. Biologically, we are wired to be social. We survived in groups. We want to belong, and that is not going away. And I want to make clear that the popularity of the win-win-winner scenario means that there will be more desire for virtual work, both from leaders and employees. It doesn't mean that everyone will work virtually 100% of the time. We are confident that there will be, the policies will relax, there will be optionality to work virtually or work in the office. There will be more arrangements put in place, but it doesn't mean that there will be nobody in the office, no in-person meetings, right? We're just saying that there will be a greater investment in that.
And Sergey, at the risk of going off on a small specific, one of the things we've talked about is, I guess, reminding ourselves that working from home is, in historical context, relatively new. From the mid to late 1700s, early 1800s, people started to work in the way we understand it now. But when Sergey talks about how are we biologically wired, for many years we worked as family units. So it becomes a question of where are those biological needs best met, and how can we have the best of both worlds?
No, that's a very good point. I mean, we're talking a lot about, working from home, but there's actually another question here coming. And the question is, I mean, will the working from home actually cross borders? Will this, virtual work will actually give the opportunity for international workers to work with companies that are, in another place around the world? What is your opinion on that? I mean, I think we already have an answer looking at how, we're already, connected in different places in the world. But yeah, I would like to know your thoughts on that.
So just for the folks on the phone, maybe we'll give a potted history, but I am an Australian who is now in the US by way of London and Amsterdam. Sergey?
I'm Russian working in Madrid, we're leading a team of 6 people, none of whom is in Madrid.
And I'm a French Indian and I'm living in London.
Just imagine a life where all of us were doing exactly this, but I could be in Australia. Sergey could be in Moscow, and like you could be back in France. So
that's true.
I think the possibilities it creates for people is fantastic. And if we look, I'm putting my kind of practitioner's hat on, the number of great high potentials whose careers have been limited because of geographical immobility, and that disproportionately impacts women in the research, at least. Imagine if some of those barriers were not there. I mean, I think from a talent point of view, this has to be fascinating to talent managers.
Yeah, it expands your talent pool significantly.
Maybe we have. Sorry.
Sorry, I could get excited. Don't let me get started on the
excited.
bank. Oh. Go on, you've got another question. Sorry.
No, I mean, we have a lot of, the L&D community that, logs into those webinars. And the question that we get regularly is, how would that, what you just talked about, how would it be framed in a program if it was delivered in a company or in a business? Going through, exactly what we just discussed.
There is a lot of, there are many conversations happening right now about what's happening to training, to learning, to education, and not only in companies, but also in universities, at schools. Will the digital replace, supplement, supplant, or digital is here until there is a vaccine for coronavirus? And I think that the true answer is somewhere in the middle. Digital has a great potential for learning. And digitally enhanced learning or technology enabled learning, we know, leads to a greater outcomes than purely digital or purely face-to-face. You need to be strategic, and you need to be thinking, okay, what can I deploy to my employee base at scale, and that actually renders itself easily to virtual learning. Excel skills, or even presentation skills. Presentation skills is great because everything can be recorded in Zoom, and I can analyze how well I present. So actually there are lots of advantages. If we talk about self-awareness, if we talk about complex skills like strategic thinking, or leading through paradox, dealing with ambiguity, or inspiring others, I think that there is a strong face-to-face component, and we will see a great increase in virtual and digital opportunities, either as pre-work or post-work, synchronous or asynchronous, will seem more blended, definitely. Will the face-to-face learning go away? I personally believe it won't.
And I think one of the things that's interesting for practitioners is, what is the scale at which I can develop, if I can, it's an if I can successfully take in classroom experiences and put them online. Because you imagine now, one of the limitations we all face is we run out of resources to do some of the higher touch programs that we all, really love to deliver and love to participate in. But the number of employees that I could touch, the amount of learning that could happen, formal learning that could happen, if we crack the nuts on how to do it digitally, successfully, because we've all had those horrible e-learnings, but if you could recreate the experience, the personal experience digitally, your ability to scale the number of people that you educate.
And the business school organization that cracks the nut on creating virtual digital experiences, so experiential learning online, that would be a win-win winner.
No, thank you very much for these insights. I'm sure many people here on the webinar do appreciate those pieces of insight. I'm conscious of time. We're running a bit behind the agenda. So I think we're just going to wrap it up here. So Angela, Sergey, thank you very much for the session today. I mean, I found it really, really interesting. Definitely think that, I could apply. So thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody that joined today. I hope as well you found the content interesting as I did. So I wish you all a very nice day. Please be safe. And Sergey, Angela, I hope we are actually able to do another webinar soon on the topic that you covered, Sergey.
Looking forward to.
Thank you very much. Have a great day, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.